I'm looking forward to walking you through the trends in the digital and media asset management marketplace in 2015. I know a lot of you on this call are already subscribers to Real Story Group Research, so hopefully you have perchance already read the market analysis that we published a couple weeks ago that was authored by myself and my colleague Mark Davey, which gives an in-depth overview of the trends in the market as we see them now. And this is really just a high-level, brushing the surface view of that. So as I go through some of these high-level items and trends, you can definitely rest assured that if you're a subscriber, you can get a lot more detail on these. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, you should be. So hopefully this information will tempt you to learn more about us and what we have to offer at Real Story Group in terms of our research. So diving right in, you can obviously tweet about this webinar. There's my handle there, at Theresa Regli, as we go, and you could even use the hashtag RSGwebinar if you so desire. All right, just getting started. For those of you who aren't familiar with Real Story Group, I'll be very quick. We offer technology research in a variety of areas, digital media asset management being but one of those areas. We also have research in many other technology domains, including web content management, social technology, marketing automation, portals, SharePoint. I think that's most of them. There's many others. And we also provide strategic consulting for companies that are looking to either select a product or implement best practices in their organization as they try to integrate and connect these products across their enterprise. And we only do that for end buyers and end users and not for technology vendors, so we have no conflict of interest. If you haven't seen our latest digital workplace and marketing technology vendor map, this is it. We just published it late in 2014, and we updated it with a wealth of additional vendors that we are covering now. We do review and evaluate over 250 vendors across the markets that we analyze. And today, as I mentioned, we're focused on digital and media asset management. So that's the light purple line that starts in the top left of this map and kind of snakes its way through the middle and then goes up and to the right. And the first thing I'll mention in terms of trends in this space is the proliferation of the number of vendors in this space. Despite a number of acquisitions and mergers over the years, in this space we see more of a growth of new vendors and a proliferation of new vendors than we see consolidation, really. And that's really in contrast to some of the other markets that we cover, where many of the vendors are being acquired by larger vendors. In the DAM space, that's not quite as common. We're seeing a lot of newer competitors coming into the DAM space, in particular with cloud-based and cloud-oriented DAM solutions, and I'll be talking a bit about that as we move through the webinar today. All right, I'm going to introduce 8 key trends that I'm seeing in 2015 and early 2015, and some of these are really carryovers from last year, but have in fact become even more prominent as the new year dawned. And I'll walk through each of these and then go into depth on a few of them as we move through. So the first thing, and I've talked about this a bit in the past, but I think it's even more profound than it's ever been, which is that this discipline that we call digital asset management is really becoming a much broader ecosystem. So originally DAM being just about managing final assets, it's really now about not just the domain of managing final assets, but it's also about production and distribution. And I'll show an illustration of what I mean by this in just a few moments. But this is really a challenge both for the practitioners of digital asset management and also the technology providers who frankly are having a very hard time meeting the demands of this very broad and diverse ecosystem that is digital asset management. The line of enterprise versus workgroup digital asset management are blurring. So traditionally, it was very easy to put vendors in boxes and say these are the vendors that are really good at workgroup DAM or small group DAM, marketing, etc. Versus the big, heavy lifting enterprise DAM vendors, meaning millions of assets, lots of heavy integration needs, much bigger companies and much larger numbers of assets. That's really, really blurring, and part of why that's happening is due to the smaller vendors that are really basically growing in prominence and supporting bigger and bigger implementations, and I'll talk about that as well with some illustrations in a moment. And I already see that the questions are coming in here, so I'll be sure to address those as I go through. Nearly all companies are producing video now, which is a particularly interesting situation we find ourselves in because everybody's become a broadcaster in some way or another. And what we're finding among our subscriber base is that these video workflows and distributing these videos and analyzing these videos, who's watching it, how, on what kind of devices, is becoming an increasing challenge for companies that aren't in necessarily the business of video production. For broadcasters, they've been doing it for a very, very long time. But as far as corporate video management is becoming a burden, not just in terms of workflows and process, but also in terms of management, distribution, streaming, and all these things that corporations, frankly, haven't had much experience with. Vendors are still falling short in delivering on the technology needs, and we recently completed a survey in Q4. We had a couple hundred organizations respond, and I'm going to share with you some of the preliminary results of that survey, where you will see that many vendors, or I should say many buyers of technology, are not particularly happy with their vendors and the tools that they have. Software as a service and cloud-based DAM systems are definitely becoming the new normal. This is increasing exponentially, and I would say in terms of inquiries for people who are either purchasing new systems for the first time, who don't have a DAM, or companies that have been on a DAM or had a DAM for a long time that's been on-premise. It's frankly a shift, even for organizations that have had on-premise DAM, to say, now I want to consider software as a service. I don't want to manage these giant multi-terabyte drives, and they want to go towards the cloud. So that's becoming very, very common. And as the sophistication of sort of the broader needs of digital marketers increases, I should say, the call for deeper integration is also profound. So it's extremely rare nowadays that any organization will say, I just need a DAM and I don't need it to connect to anything else, or I don't need data from somewhere else, or I don't need to push it somewhere else. It's just not an island anymore, and that's become more profound. I think this trend really started a couple years ago, but it was really just big enterprises that were talking in these terms, and now it's even small companies that want to connect these different pieces. So interoperability becomes very high on the agenda. Standards are higher on the agenda. APIs are higher on the agenda, and everything to make these systems more interoperable is key, and I'll show some examples of that as well. And then the last one is less technology-oriented and more organizational, which is companies are now often in their second or third iterations of DAM implementations, and there's generally, fortunately, a much better understanding of what needs to happen. That's good. We're not neophytes anymore. People realize what they have to do, and they often understand that DAM has to fit into a broader digital marketing practice. However, what we found in our survey is that very few companies are actually measuring the effectiveness of what they're doing, and that's obviously very unfortunate. So I'll share some information there about how that's affecting the industry as a whole. So from that, I will go into each of these trends, and I think it's going to be easier if I leave questions till the end because there are already so many. So I'll make sure I get through the slides, and then I'll be happy to give you some extra time, if possible, to answer the questions. So let me first talk about this trend of the expanding ecosystem, and this is a graphic that we put together late last year because I was trying to communicate just how DAM is expanding beyond the management of completed assets. And rather than thinking of it necessarily as a single process or an end-to-end process, I often like to talk about it like a hive, where you've got not necessarily just one or a couple departments kind of working in a linear fashion, but you've actually got a whole bunch of worker bees kind of coming together, and they all have different things or different pollen to contribute to this hive to develop the output of what you need for effective marketing. And so each of these items here becomes part of digital asset management. So traditionally, you might just have been managing final assets, and that might be the honeycomb parts that are, for instance, print-ready output. You might have produced something that was in Quark back in the day, or Adobe InDesign or something like that, and you would put that in a DAM, and you would be able to put that sort of a loose workflow around it, and then push it out perhaps to a printer. But these days, the DAM process is really starting all the way back when a photographer takes a picture, or even when a creative person just conceives of a particular creative concept. And immediately, even from the point of ideation, they're saying, well, I need something to actually put this in. I need to kick off a workflow. I need something to manage it. And so there's a whole host of tools that are on the production end of the spectrum, whether that's the things that you're using to create your compound assets like brochures and marketing materials. So that might be your Adobe Creative Cloud, or that might be your video production system. And somehow immediately that needs to connect to a DAM. Because once that asset is created in whatever you're using, there might have to be some back and forth between your production system and your DAM. And then you have roles and groups that you have to manage, and you have different permissions that you have to manage, and that might be in another system. It might be in your LDAP or your Active Directory, for example. And then once it's in the DAM, it might go through another set of reviews and workflows, and you might have to manage rights around it. You might have to have very extensive metadata that you have to manage either within the DAM or externally. And then finally, as you get more towards the right-hand side, there's all these things that have to happen in order to really push all these things out to different channels. You might have to encrypt assets. You might have to assemble separate and disparate assets, and then finally deliver it in an effective way. Now, generally, this isn't done with one technology. When you look at a hive like this, you're talking about 3 or 4, even 5 technologies coming together here. But it is still the world of DAM, and it is what DAM needs to connect to. So even if you are specifically purchasing a digital asset management system, you have to think about all these pieces and all these different worker bees that are coming together in the hive, and think about what is your system of record for each of these little honeycombs here, and then how are you going to connect it all. And this is really the number one thing to be thinking about with DAM in 2015, and how you're connecting these systems, how you're integrating them together. Okay, so as I mentioned, that enterprise DAM is sort of blurring with workgroup DAM, and I admit that these boxes are harder and harder to draw on an annual basis, because many of these categories are harder and harder to put vendors into. And actually, we are currently working on version 7 of our digital and media asset management research, which is now over 600 pages, and we review all the vendors that are on this particular slide. We review 43 vendors, I believe, right now at last count. We're adding more in the next edition. But we're actually going to be recategorizing these and sort of renaming these categories, because the reality is there's a lot of the vendors that we have traditionally put in the mid-scale and enterprise workgroup DAM category are now supporting much larger scale enterprise implementations, or they are specialized in supporting a very specific type of large-scale implementation. So I could specifically point to, for example, Equilibrium or Zanza in the mid-scale enterprise and workgroup DAM category, and say in media companies, Zanza, for example, does a great deal of media distribution, and that is their sweet spot. Wave Corporation, for example, they do a great deal with manufacturing corporations. And so some of them do larger scale implementations in specific verticals, and that's something that that we obviously can't ignore. So these categories are getting rethinked, I should say, specifically because so many vendors are scaling upwards, and that's a very dramatic thing, and it's causing a lot of competition for the traditional large-scale vendors. So the box in the middle bottom, these guys really all used to be the big-scale behemoths, and if you were going to do a big DAM implementation, you kind of went towards these vendors, but that's less and less true. They're facing more and more competition from the vendors in the smaller-scale space, who were traditionally in the smaller-scale space. And then also, open source DAM is maturing a great deal. And that's to say that even though some of these open source tools have been around for quite a long time, they're now have a much deeper track record. And even though some of them don't have a very large community around them, they're growing in prominence because they have been doing more and more and larger representative implementations for what people need to do on a larger scale. So that's a big deal. And even some of these niche players, so you might laugh to say, well, why is Microsoft or EMC or Oracle considered a niche player? You know, they're not specifically DAM vendors, but a lot of big companies take these document management tools or web content management tools, and they add a component or two onto them. They add a transcoder, they add a transformation engine. A lot of big companies will turn to their big infrastructure vendors and say, sell me a supplement for DAM or sell me an add-on for DAM. And that's especially the case with big enterprises. The broadcast sector in the top left is still very, very much the broadcast sector, and these are vendors that specifically sell into broadcast companies and are managing high-end video and TV anywhere sorts of scenarios, whereas the bottom left vendors are very much for supporting a lot of the corporate video scenarios that I mentioned before. So we're seeing a lot of our subscribers ask specifically about these vendors because they want a more approachable, kind of lightweight video management solution and streaming solution. And these are some of the ones that we're looking at and reviewing today. So that's a quick overview. And you know, I drew a line here specifically because I actually organized the top right quadrant kind of specifically. So the vendors that are more to the left, we consider more enterprisey than those on the right. So I pointed to you know, NetX and Adobe, Wave, Evolve, and those sorts of vendors. They're very much the ones that have been scaling up and doing bigger and bigger implementations. But even some of the more pure play SaaS vendors, so even if we look at vendors like PicturePark and Binder, you know, Photoware, even Widen, they're supporting bigger and bigger implementations too, and that's not just an effect of their effort to scale their systems, but it's also the demand of their customers who continue to add assets at such a tremendous rate. So keep that in mind. This is really a market and shift, and personally, I think it's a good thing that many of these vendors who have traditionally supported smaller implementations are giving the big guys a lot more competition.